Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, Text 6. Translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Savai Pungsang Paro Dharmo Yato Bhaktiradhokshaje Ahaitukya Pratihata Yayatma Suprasidati. Translation. The supreme occupation, dharma, for all humanity is that by which men can attain to loving devotional service unto the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. Purport. In this statement, Srila Sutta Goswami answers the first question of the sages of Naimisharanya. The sages asked him to summarize the whole range of revealed scriptures and present the most essential parts so that fallen people, or the people in general, might easily take it up. The Vedas prescribe two different types of occupation for the human being. One is called the Pravritti Marg, or the path of sense enjoyment, and the other is called the Nivritti Marg, or the path of renunciation. The path of enjoyment is inferior, and the path of sacrifice for the supreme cause is superior. The material existence of the living being is a diseased condition of actual life. Actual life is spiritual existence, or Brahma Bhuta existence, where life is eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. Material existence is temporary, illusory, and full of miseries. There is no happiness at all. There is just the futile attempt to get rid of the miseries, and temporary cessation of misery is falsely called happiness. Therefore, the path of progressive material enjoyment, which is temporary, miserable, and illusory, is inferior. But devotional service to the Supreme Lord, which leads one to eternal, blissful, and all-cognizant life, is called the superior quality of occupation. This is sometimes polluted when mixed with the inferior quality. For example, adoption of devotional service for material gain is certainly an obstruction to the progressive path of renunciation. Renunciation or abnegation for ultimate good is certainly a better occupation than enjoyment in the diseased condition of life. Such enjoyment only aggravates the symptoms of disease and increases its duration. Therefore, devotional service to the Lord must be pure in quality, i.e., that is, without the least desire for material enjoyment. One should, therefore, accept the superior quality of occupation in the form of the devotional service of the Lord, without any tinge of unnecessary desire, fruitive action, and philosophical speculation. This alone can lead one to perpetual solace in his service. We have purposely denoted dharma as occupation because the root meaning of the word dharma is that which sustains one's existence. A living being's sustenance of existence is to coordinate his activities with his eternal relation with the Supreme Lord Krishna. Krishna is the central pivot of living beings, and he is the all-attractive living entity or eternal form amongst all other living beings or eternal forms. Each and every living being has his eternal form as the spiritual existence, and Krishna is the eternal attraction for all of them. Krishna is the complete whole, and everything else is his part and parcel. The relation is one of the servant and the served. It is transcendental and is completely distinct from our experience in material existence. This relation of servant and the served is the most congenial form of intimacy. One can realize it as devotional service progresses. Everyone should engage himself in that transcendental loving service of the Lord, even in the present conditional state of material existence. That will gradually give one the clue to actual life and please him to complete satisfaction. Savai pungsang parod harmo yato bhakti radhokshaje ahaitukya pratihataya yama suprasidati. This is, of course, one of the most well-known and important verses of Srimad Bhagavatam in defining devotional service, in defining the whole purpose of life. Although these two, there are two words I want to discuss this morning, then neither of them are directly mentioned in this verse, although they are both implicit in it. Those two words are Seva, which means service, and Siddhanta, which means proper philosophical conclusion. Seva means service. It means particularly selfless service. Service that is done as a duty with no expectation of reward to a higher person. Thus we have the terms Bhagavat Seva, Guru Seva. Working in a company and for earning money, that does not fit the description of Seva. That's an occupation, that's vritti. To be precise, working for money is called svavritti, which means the means of occupation of a dog. That is what it is referred to in Srimad Bhagavatam. But Seva means selfless service. And so in devotional service, bhakti yoga, as is described in this verse, bhakti. These terms, seva and siddhanta, they are central. Bhakti is practically synonymous with seva. There cannot be bhakti without seva. But there is not only a sense of duty, but a sense of love. So it's more developed in that sense. So in Krishna consciousness, the whole sadhana, or the means of practice to attain the desired goal, and siddhanta, it all comes down to this selfless service, ahaituki. Ahaituki literally means without cause, but it means without any material motivation, without any personal motivation. The cause can be said to be Krishna himself, because he is all attractive and it is his nature to attract the living beings, that he inspires service to himself in those living beings who are thus inclined, and the lack of inclination to serve Krishna, because the inclination to serve Krishna is the natural tendency of all living beings, so any lacking in that is understood to be a pollution on the heart. So selfless service to Krishna, ahaituki, and apratihata, that which is not, even in the presence of obstacles, is continued. Unstoppable, 24. Not only is it not stopped, but it is unstoppable. So this selfless service is, the very idea of selfless service is attractive to people who are not grossly materialistic. Grossly materialistic people, they can only conceive of selfish service. That means, yes, I believe in selfless service. Everyone should selflessly serve me. And whatever I do, it's all for me. So that is selfishness. But even among most materialistic people, gross selfishness is not considered a laudable quality. Selflessness is appreciated by people who aspire for higher levels of consciousness. But without understanding Siddhanta, or the teachings of Shastra, of Scripture, that are meant for revealing the highest good, here is stated, Savai Pungsang Paro Dharmo, that certainly for all living beings is the highest occupation. That is a translation of the first line of this verse. So without understanding this Siddhanta, the proper understanding of what is the highest occupation, we may take it as selfless service, but without understanding who that is meant for. In Krishna consciousness, we understand that Krishna, as Srila Prabhupada writes in this purport, is the central pivot of all living beings. So selfless service is properly to be offered to Krishna. So if we do not know who to serve, how to serve selflessly, then attempts at selfless service will flounder. Siddhanta balya chitena karaha alash iha hoite krishna lage sudhir ramanash. Therefore we are enjoined to not be lazy in the matter of understanding Siddhanta. In this way the mind, by not being lazy in understanding Siddhanta, the mind becomes strongly attached to Krishna. Without understanding that selfless service is meant for Krishna, then we'll misunderstand and we may think that selfless service is meant for serving the poor, the parents, a dog. There are many cases of people who are lauded as national heroes for their selfless service to their country. They gave their lives in service to their country. But such service, yayatma suprasidati, it does not give satisfaction to the self. And while a person is considered a selfless hero for serving his country, in battle, to the other side who he's fighting, he's just someone they want to kill. So it's not universally appreciated. So service should be selfless, but we should know who that should be to. Now this might seem counterintuitive. Surely service to the poor, selfless service to the poor, what could be higher than this? But there are problems with that. Although we may think it's better to serve the poor than to serve some God who made them poor, He doesn't seem to care for them or look after them, so we can come along and do a better job than God did. Well, even Jesus said that when a similar proposition was made to Him, that the poor will always be with us. Means that people are poor or sick or in some, what we would call, disadvantaged position because they acted in the previous life in a manner which necessitated them taking birth in such a situation. So the idea that we will help the poor is, first of all, the idea that we shall help the poor means that we're trying to outdo God, who placed them in that situation. Another thing is, how many can you help? And what is to stop them becoming poor again in this life? Even if you can mitigate their poverty, what is to stop them again becoming poor? Or the rich man becoming poor? And how many can you help? Just like Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I used to live in Calcutta in the late 1970s and 1980s, in and out of Calcutta. The people of Calcutta, you never heard anyone speak anything about Mother Teresa. And there are plenty of poor people all over the place, all along the train lines. There are people living in shanty towns. So how many people could she help anyway? So she's lauded for helping the poor, but what actually did she do? And if someone leaves this world without understanding that we are eternal spirit soul, we are eternal parts and parcels of Krishna, we are meant for service to Him, and unless they engage in devotional service, at least in a primary way, then their poverty may be mitigated to some extent, but they'll have to be born again and again and again and again. As a cat, a dog, a rat, a fish, a tree, and so on. So, what is the actual help? The rich man and the poor man, they both have to be born again and again and again. So from the perspective of our ultimate existentiality, then feeding the poor is a very pathetic or hopeless way to try and help people. But it seems to be very good and very helpful if we're stuck in the foolishness of the bodily concept of life, in which we think that this life is all in all. That is, by the power of Maya, every living being, including the cats and the dogs and the fish, they cannot see beyond the immediate present situation, and they take that to be all in all. So we have to understand Siddhanta, the proper philosophical conclusion. Otherwise we take this life to be all in all, to be so important. But it's only one life in many, 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 many lifetimes. We have to understand Siddhanta. Understanding necessitates standing under, as Srila Prabhupada explained. Instead of trying to understand everything by our own brain power, if we just accept that we're tiny living beings in a vast universe, and our lifespan is just a blip in eternity, and our intelligence is extremely limited. So our ability to understand is anyway extremely insignificant. Then we can submit ourselves to the source of all knowledge, who is Krishna. Jnane prayasamutapasya namanta eva jivanti sanmukharitam bhavati avartam sthane stita shurikatang tanuvang manobhir ye prayasho jitaditopya apitaistri lokam. This Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when being propositioned as to the purpose of life and how to attain it, rejected various propositions, but he accepted this. That a person who gives up the endeavor to understand everything simply by his own ability and becomes humble and dedicates his life for hearing about Krishna from self-realized persons, dedicates himself body, mind and words, by this very process, one can conquer he who is otherwise unconquerable. So he's standing under. Otherwise, if one thinks, I am helping the poor, that's standing over. That's not service, actually. One's thinking, yes, I'm in a better position than these people. It's an attempt to demonstrate one's superiority by helping others. It's a better way of demonstrating one's superiority than going in and killing them all. But that's another way of demonstrating one's superiority. That's one's supposed superiority. But it's also an arrogant position. So when one actually understands all these points, he understands that there's nothing of ultimate value for helping others than to propagate this ahaitukya pratihata bhakti. Unless living beings who are entrapped in the illusion that forces them to take birth after birth after birth, unless one propagates to them, helps them to understand that we are meant for serving Krishna, without any personal motivation, without any deviation from this, without any other interest, without any other activity. This alone is for our ultimate benefit. Unless we understand this, that nothing else can really help anyone. Any other promise of help is simply illusory and serves to entangle us more and more in our very problem. Yeah, this so-called welfare work actually makes our situation worse because it reinforces the bodily concept of life. Now I'm in a better position than I was. I was hungry, now I have food, so now I'm in a better position than I was. But ultimately we're not in a better position because we still have to die again and again, be born again and again, and suffer again and again. So in that sense, there's no major difference between, for instance, Mother Teresa and Herr Hitler, who are respectively maybe the most lauded and most despised persons of the 20th century, because neither of them made any real difference in people's existence. Of course, you may say, well, there is a lot of difference, but ultimately Mother Teresa couldn't help anyone. They still, after coming in contact with her, they still had to continue in the path of birth and death. And ultimately Hitler couldn't hurt anyone because they still had to go on in the path of birth and death. If they hadn't been tortured and killed by the people who, if they hadn't been tortured and killed by Hitler, they could be tortured and killed and slaughtered in Texas in 2014 as a cow, for instance. As there are thousands of living beings in Texas who are today being tortured and killed, and they suffer just as much as the Jews in the Holocaust. They also suffer. They're also living beings. So Hitler was a demon, no doubt, but then the same thing is going on, not only in Texas, but in various places throughout the world, including in India, unfortunately. So when one understands that there is nothing better, or actually there is nothing of any value, ultimately, than to propagate this ahaitukya pratihata bhakti to Krishna. That must be stressed. It must be to Krishna. Otherwise, to propagate selfless service without making it clear that Krishna is the proper recipient of that service. Not that he needs our service, but we need it. He is pleased if we serve him. We become pleased if we serve him. So if we understand this, then we'll be happy to scrub the floor in the temple, to ring the bell in the temple, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, that the neophyte devotee ringing the bell in the temple of Krishna is more valuable both materially and spiritually than millions of altruists opening millions of hospitals, schools, and so on. Even materially, it's more helpful. So when we understand that, then we'll be happy to perform any menial service for Krishna. And even without understanding that, one can perform any menial service for Krishna. But there is a difference. Those who perform devotional service with the clear understanding of who am I? I am an eternal jiva, an eternal spiritual part and parcel of Krishna, who is the supreme object of service for all living beings. So when we understand that, then we'll become a haitukya pratihata, unshakable in our devotional service and without any motive. Otherwise, without that clear understanding, one may be engaged in devotional service, but then some difficulty comes, or some distraction comes, and we become distracted, and our devotional service does not continue with full selflessness. So this point, selfless service, it is undoubtedly a very high aspiration. It's a better aspiration than simply me, and me. What is the purpose of your life? Me, and me. Ahammameti. I, me, and mine. That is very low. Even many animals, they cooperate together and help each other. So humans who simply live for themselves, aghayam indriya ramo mogham partha sajivati, a person who lives simply for the satisfaction of his senses, Krishna says, his life is sinful. He lives a sinful life. Just the very attitude, what to speak of the actions that will follow it from it. So that is a very low platform of existence. The idea of selfless service is much higher, but unless that selfless service is clearly directed toward Krishna, then it's just another form of cheating, as is stated in the Bhagavatam. Kaitava dharma. It must be clearly centered on Krishna. Otherwise, all our so-called welfare work, humanitarian activities, it's basically just people who do this without clearly directing it toward Krishna. They're basically doing it for their own name and fame, to become known as a great welfare worker, or out of a misplaced sense of serving humanity, which ultimately boils down to another phase of envy of Krishna. You think that I am helping others, as if one has any eligibility to help others. Only Krishna can help. Those who carry the message of Krishna, they are actual welfare workers, as is stated by the gopis. We find in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhurida Janaha. What is that verse? Tava katamritam tapta jivanam kavibi iritam kalmashapaham Shravana mangalam srimadatatam bhuvigrinanti ye bhurida janaha. Topics of Krishna is just like nectar. It stops death. And it helps persons who are burning, whose lives has burned up in the fire of material existence. So persons who are actually learned, who actually understand Siddhanta, they propagate the nectar of topics of Krishna. And which removes all sinfulness. You see, that's another fault in humanitarian welfare work. It does nothing to dispel the ignorance by which people are forgetful of Krishna, by which they are inclined towards sinful activities. So, without that, it's better for a poor man to be poor than to have money, because if he has money, he'll engage it in sinful activities. So better he's poor. The so-called helping the poor man actually helps him to suffer more and to cause suffering to others. Kalmashapahamsha, simply to hear topics of Krishna is auspicious. And brings in all auspiciousness. Therefore, persons who distribute that single-pointedly, without getting diverted this way and that way to so-called bodily welfare, they are the most magnanimous persons. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also very much appreciated this verse. So there are a few points about selfless service. It must be directed toward Krishna according to the directions of great acharyas. That does not preclude, for instance, distributing prasadam to one and all, to the poor people such as the billionaires. They're also poor people in the sense that they don't know Krishna. Their life is poverty-stricken. But always the emphasis must be understanding who we are, who everyone is in relation to Krishna, and helping them to come in contact with Krishna, to understand who is Krishna, to understand the perfection of selflessness. So, Hare Krishna. Any question about this, please? Yeah.
My question has to do with your comparison of Mother Teresa with Hitler.
Yeah, my comparison of Mother Teresa with Hitler. It's shocking, no doubt.
Many people would consider this gross blasphemy. And hearing this blasphemy.
Gross blasphemy.
And even we're seeing Mother Teresa being featured in books by other spiritual masters like Radhanath Swami.
Is it?
Yes. So my question has to do with...
But just consider, those persons who were so-called helped by Mother Teresa, what happened to them after they died? They got reborn again. And what happened to the people killed by Hitler? They got reborn again. So ultimately, what's the difference?
No, I accept your point. I'm only bringing up an argument just to clarify this more. So someone would argue that Mother Teresa is selflessly serving God. No?
Mother Teresa is selflessly serving God. I contest that because she lived in Calcutta for years. She must have known about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If she actually was favored by God and actually had any real inclination, then why she wouldn't be attracted to that? And living in India, she must be aware that eating animals is not a high level of religion. She never had any inclination toward that. She wanted to convert people to beef-eating Christians. So how was she actually, where was her godliness?
Radhanath Swami in the book Journey Home, he spent some time with her a month or so, and he talks about how she was always talking about how she was doing everything for God.
She's talking about how she's doing everything for God, but then God doesn't tell us to feed people with meat. The people who do jihadi terrorism, they also say they're doing it for God. Therefore, I'm making the point that it's not just seva, selfless service, but one has to understand Siddhanta. Otherwise, man-made notions of service to God can actually be not only not service to God, but highly harmful to human society. And actually anything which is not actually service to God, as He desires and demands it, it will be an obstruction to the actual path of service to God. Shruti, Smriti, Purana, Adi, Pancharatra, Vidhim, Vinhara, Aikantaki. You see this word here? Aikantaki, Haraya, Bhaktir, Utpata, Yaiva, Kalpate. Any so-called service to God which is not in line with Shastra is simply a disturbance in the matter of service to God, because then people think that service to God means blowing up buildings and feeding poor people with meat, or even with vegetarian food, and missing the actual point of who God is and what He wants.
On the radio program that I heard, a man called in on this point and said that
A man called in on this point. Who is making this point?
On this point, it was being discussed by Reed Marsh on the radio show here in America, and a man called in and said that your literature is full of killing. He said Krishna himself is instructing Arjuna to kill. And he gave this example of how Krishna and Balaram killed the entire Yadu dynasty in Kurukshetra. So he's saying that... Yes,
our literature is full of killing.
Yes.
All right, well that's accepted in every religion, isn't it? That God kills everyone.
No, but the point about, blowing up people in the name of religion, he's saying that our religion is full of that, with those examples.
No. It's not. We don't have the idea of jihad and terrorism. Killing is there. Killing is there. It's not a central part of Krishna consciousness, but violence has its place. That is required sometimes. But we should know that under some circumstances, killing is pleasing to Krishna. In some cases, not killing is pleasing to Krishna. In general, not killing is pleasing, but sometimes killing is required. Just like, this example just came in my mind, that a few years ago at a check-in line of an El Al flight from Los Angeles, one man pulled out a gun and started shooting people. And then that man who was doing the shooting was shot dead by a security guard. So no one would fault the security guard for shooting that man to save the lives of persons who were just standing in the check-in line. So there's an example of where killing is laudable. The man who pulled out the gun and started shooting people in the check-in line, his killing was not laudable, but to kill that man in that circumstance was laudable. So the Shastra does not recommend indiscriminate, whimsical killing, but under certain circumstances it is required. Under certain circumstances, not to kill would be a fault, as Krishna told Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. But if someone else had come up, if Kunti had come up and said, well, I'm going to fight, then Krishna would not have encouraged her. It wasn't meant for her. It was meant for Arjuna.
This point to keep there was a young man here a couple nights ago from Bhagavad class, and he had his old parents with him who were naked. And he was asking Madhava Maharaj that according to your understanding, Maharaj, should I renounce my duties? For example, when he gave the example of taking care of his old parents, and just engage myself in renunciation.
Should a man with elderly parents leave them and just engage in renunciation? I couldn't say without knowing the man and his situation better. The application of the dharmic principles, there are general principles, but how they are to be applied in each person's life, we have to see the individual. It's not that one size fits everyone. It is a dharmic principle that elderly parents should be looked after. It is a dharmic principle that one should do everything only for the sake of Krishna. Those two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. If you have to choose one over the other, then one should choose to fully serve Krishna. But again, we have to see the situation. There are many people who, in the name of renunciation, they give up everything to serve Krishna, but actually they're just their real motive is just to avoid the responsibility. They're just irresponsible. It's not that they have such a strong motive to serve Krishna. And such persons, if they so-called renounce everything, usually after some time they get entangled in some material situation anyway. So you have to see the individual and what their motive is, what their consciousness is, what the condition of the parents are. That should also be considered. So I wouldn't want to give a reply without knowing more details. There's a question now.
Beginning of the class, I mentioned somebody working in the factory, and there was some word that you get the sense of it.
Working in a factory. I didn't say working in a factory, I don't believe, but working for others. Shvavriti. That is the term used in Srimad Bhagavatam for someone who is, by his work, he is maintained by others. It literally means dog livelihood. It's meant for Shudras. When Srila Prabhupada said that most of the people in the world nowadays are Shudras, it wasn't just some blanket insult, but it was based on the fact that most people are employed.
So it's seen as a Sudra activity, obviously, but you can also spiritualize that.
One can spiritualize, as Srila Prabhupada mentions in one of his Bhagavad Gita purports, that a devotee who works in a factory and gives all the money for Krishna's service is a sannyasi.
This one, you do work, but you give money for Krishna, or you try to maintain yourself in devotional service. Then that's also.
Yeah, a devotee may be working in a factory, but it doesn't mean that he's like a dog. Although, in terms of his profession, it could be said like that, but it shouldn't be considered that a devotee is like a dog. But if we are to establish Varnashram, and this is something that I quite often say, which I don't think most of the members of the movement have even thought about, if we are to establish Varnashram, in which it's understood that all Vaishnavas are higher than Brahmanas, but still within Varnashram there's a division according to occupation. So if we just make everyone who gets initiated after some time, make them a Brahmana, whatever they're doing, then how are we going to establish Varnashram? Brahmanas should be those who are doing teaching, preaching, deity worship, cooking for the deity, like that. It confuses the matter. If everyone, whatever our occupation is, then everyone is designated as a Brahmana. But that's another discussion.
So following on from that discussion of Swavriti, and two questions. So do you think that devotees who come to the temple, they join, after some time, those who get married, and they have to take up some occupation by widowhood, do you think that they should avoid at all costs working for someone else?
Should a devotee avoid at all costs working for someone else? It may not be very practical, but at the same time, the same point is there that we should, if we are to establish Varnashram, as was one of Srila Prabhupada's most important instructions, then simply to designate every devotee who manages to follow the four regulated principles for 6 months or a year after getting Harinam initiation, and they may pass a Bhakti Shastri course also. But if we designate everyone as a Brahmana when they're not acting as a Brahmana, then how are we to establish Varnashram? That's my point. It requires more thinking about. We have to set up communities in which devotees can live as Brahmanas. It's very difficult to do so if one is part of the modern economic system, which makes everyone into a Shudra, with few exceptions. So, Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Yeah, just one other point there that Srila Prabhupada himself, he spoke Siddhanta on and on and on, isn't it? Literally day and night. He was speaking the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, just so that we can understand it properly. And often he'd repeat the same points again and again and again. How important it is to be fixed in Siddhanta. Without that, then we're off course. We should clearly understand these points. I sometimes mention Mother Teresa. I know it's shocking, but it is an apt case. How much could she actually help people? Actually help means to help them to come to Krishna consciousness. But in that sense, she helped how many people? 0. If anything, she took people away from it by converting them to Christianity, in which, in the kind of traditional Christianity that Mother Teresa was raised in, what she would consider to be Hinduism is produced of the devil. That heathenism, paganism, all this kind of thing. Jai, Hare Krishna.